Okay. Hello. I'd like to welcome you to the SANM S4 webinar. It's a new series of webinars for Indian institutions, and we're going to be covering a variety of topics, which hopefully will be of help and interest to colleagues across India in universities and institutions. My name is Delia Hennigan. I'm the Director of Education at SANM S4 based in Delhi. SANM S4 is a specialist higher education consulting practice, and we work with over 100 global universities and Indian universities, advising on a whole range of areas that are key to success and growth. Thank you very much for joining us today. The first webinar is going to focus on an area which we think is of great importance at the moment, particularly to colleagues in India. And it's going to look at aspects of online learning and online delivery. I'm joined by two colleagues from the UK who have kindly given up their time to share their expertise and experience with us. My colleagues are Professor Ali Armalini, who is the Dean of Learning and Teaching at the University of Northampton in the UK, and Rob Howe, who is the Head of Learning Technology at the university as well. The University of Northampton has been one of the universities at the forefront of the development of online learning and delivery in the UK, and has delivered a transformational project that has affected all aspects of how the university operates and how teaching and learning is delivered. I'm not going to say any more than to say thank you so much to you all for joining us. Thank you to Ali and Rob for giving up the time to join us. And I'm going to hand over now to ask them to share their expertise and insight. We will be hoping that you will be involved in this. We don't want it to be simply a lecture. And so at the end, there is time for questions and answers. Please put your questions as we go through the presentation in the chat box, and we will answer those at the end. So look forward to engaging with you, and I'm going to hand over to Rob and Ali. Thank you.
Hello, colleagues. Good afternoon for us, good evening for you. Great pleasure. Thank you, Delia, for that introduction and for inviting us to share a few ideas with you today. I am Ali Armalini. I am Dean of Learning and Teaching at Northampton, where I have been for 8 years. And Rob will introduce himself now.
Hi, I'm Rob Howe, Head of Learning Technology. I work obviously at the University of Northampton, and you've got our Twitter accounts there as well, so please do try and connect to us and put any questions afterwards as well. So we're happy to carry on conversations from today, and thank you to Delia for inviting us for this as well. So we're going to head on to the objectives for this particular session. So we've got three main objectives actually in here. So we're going to take you for a little journey through some of our pedagogical change at Northampton, and we're going to try and think about how that actually reflects to your particular environment. So what we want to do is to use the chat, use the question and answer to try and relate everything that we've done to your particular areas as well. We're going to share some of our lessons that have been learned from the experience of doing this pedagogical change, and particularly we're going to look at some applications of that within your own setting as well, and beyond that. In terms of Northampton itself, this is one of the newest campuses actually in the world. So we're very proud about that. And this was over 5 years actually in making, planning, designing and building as well. You can see some of the screenshots from our campus. And certainly if you are in England, please do come and visit us. And we'd love to welcome you on site, certainly when we can do so safely. Show you around our lovely campus. In terms of just where we are based within England itself, You can see Northampton right in the middle there of England. So we've got Birmingham to one side, Cambridge to another, and London down below us, and Nottingham above. So we're right in the middle. So very easy to actually get to us particularly. Talking about some of our missions particularly, and our objectives actually within the university itself. This is a sort of quick infographic showing some of our key values and some of our key areas that we are actually focusing on within Northampton itself. So you can see there, although there's a lot of information necessarily on this slide, if you look at the big three areas down on the sort of right hand side there, you've got super supportive, you've got future focused, and you've got social impact. And everything that we do at the university is an interaction between those three different areas. And we're going to come back to that a little bit later on in the presentation as well. So Ali, do you want to talk a little bit more about active learning and at Northampton?
Sure. I think a good starting point, a basic starting point, is to agree on what we mean by active learning, and you will find in the literature lots of definitions of this. This is an old one from 1991, which captures the two elements that we consider essential to understand the sort of approach that we've taken at the University of Northampton: doing things and thinking about what we do. And that's the sort of engagement that we seek from our students. That's a sort of activity, not just the doing, but the thinking, the reflecting, the reapplying, the refining element as well. So that's the starting point for us. And what I'm going to share with you in the following slides are principles that we've attached to the notion of active learning, and then I'll move you on to the notion of active blended learning, which is the name that our pedagogical approach takes at the University of Northampton. So a few principles to get started with. We said doing and thinking, that's what makes learning active. We refer to active blended learning as Northampton's one of Northampton's USPs. The way we do our teaching. This is not in addition to our job, this is our job. Northampton is a teaching and employability focused university. It is not a research powerhouse. So if there is something we need to do well, that's teaching. For distance learning, we just alter the B for the D, and we use the term to describe provision that follows exactly the same principles as ABL, except the on-campus presence. One potentially controversial element there is that active blended learning revolves around the notion that content is not king, context is. And this is rather significant for us in the context of ABL and ADL at Northampton. There is a tendency, there is almost an obsession by academics to say, oh, my students love my content, I love my slides. Actually, they love their own slides. There's a tendency to think that content is everything, and anything to do with online learning has to do with putting good content online. Well, no, not in the context that we are working with, not in the context of the University of Northampton. What matters is not the content, but what learners do with the content, how they do it, why they do it, and who they do it with. And that is what really matters. Good learning contexts promote quality contact, and that is the type of relationship building that we want between our learners and our tutors. We need, as we will see in subsequent slides, we will see that we may want to steer clear of old definitions of blended learning. And the two final principles are, if you don't design properly, you are actually designing failure for your students. And if you fail to plan, you're actually planning to fail. Let's think much more closely, much more in detail about the the possible combinations, possible blends between synchronous and asynchronous work, rather than just the simplistic approach, oh, blended learning is face-to-face and online. So that sets a bit of the context for where we're going. The blend itself is represented in this slide. It's a complex, multi-layered, difficult to tame sort of concept. But overall, if I ask an audience like yourselves here, what are the dimensions of the blend? What do we mean by blend? Typically, and looking at the literature, particularly from the middle of the first decade of the 21st century, you will say, well, it's that. And what I would say is, if there is one lesson learned from today's webinar that I would like you not to forget, is that maybe you want to move away from this. Blended learning is much more complex than this. Blended learning involves other dimensions, some of which are represented here. So yes, you do have the black axis there, which includes location, face-to-face, on campus, off campus, but it includes a range of other things. For us at Northampton, the employability focus is quite big. So for us, the yellow axis is very much looking at what students can do with their learning when they graduate, when they join the work market, when they join the workplace. The red one is the one I was referring to earlier, very, very significant, synchronous, asynchronous. The purple one, independent learning versus online teaching. It is common for people not familiar with distance education to think that independent learning is you put content online, therefore my students do online learning. No, the teacher has to be just as active and just as visible as we expect our students to be. So that gives you a bit of a flavor of how we view, how we envisage the blend. So let me move on to this fairly traditional model, which shows 3 blocks: pre-session exposure to content, the face-to-face session, and the post-session consolidation and evaluation. Well, that looks very much like what you would call perhaps the flipped classroom. Now, I've got some bad news. One bit of that is that the flipped classroom may be a nice, new, sexy term, but it's conceptually, the notion of the flipped classroom has been around for a few thousand years. What has changed is the technology that supports it. And the second bit of bad news is that as it stands, that arrow doesn't work. It has severe failings, it has severe problems associated with it. And one of them is that there are bits missing in that arrow, the bits that make the content work for the students, that enable the students to take ownership of that content. As I said, what matters isn't just the content, it's what students do with it, why they do it, how they do it, and who they do it with. So that's the bit that's absent and that we need to address. And that's where we get to the ABL notion. What's missing is the sense making, is the building of the scaffold, the building of artifacts that provide the learner with the steps to take ownership of that content, to apply that content, to review and reflect on that content. So the content alone is not and should not be the focus of what our colleagues do. Rather, the content probably is already there, in many cases free access. What matters is designing artifacts, designing sense-making activities that enable students to do something meaningful with that. So in one slide, this is what ABL means. Now, this arrow is a little bit blocky, linear, a little bit rigid, and in the academic environment, we tend to like slightly more cyclical things, more flexible things. So this is exactly the same notion, but presented to you in a different manner. You will notice that from all of these slides, the word online is not present. We do not use the word online because it has led to significant confusion. You talk about blended, you talk about online, and you suddenly think, oh, the University of Northampton is moving online entirely. Nothing like that has happened. We are very proud of our face-to-face components. We are very proud of our brand new campus. You wouldn't build a brand new campus if all you wanted to do is to move online. What matters is, as shown in this figure, what learners do and how we can enable thinking and reflection about what they do. So the sense-making bit, the activities are central, the content is embedded in them. There's a real-time element to the process, which is tutor facilitated primarily in the classroom, but it could be in the lab, it could be in the field, or it could be over a cup of coffee in the library. And then there is the post-session consolidation and so forth. The bit that was removed from this diagram is the face-to-face element in the context of COVID. When the pandemic struck, of course, we had to close down the campus, and all of this continued to work without the face-to-face component, which takes me to the first definition that I want to share with you, which is what we really mean by active blended learning at the University of Northampton. It is our approach. It is what we do. It is our job. It combines sense-making activities with focused student interactions of the three types. Interactions learner-content, learner-learner, and learner-tutor. The tutor must be as visible and as active as we expect the students to be. It is not a case of delivering content to the students and come back in 3 months with your assignment. This is what we mean by ABL and nothing else. And there is a clarification below, which is that ABL focuses on engaging students in knowledge construction, reflection, and critique, learner autonomy, and learning outcomes. That's what we mean. However, this is a very much an academic definition of active blended learning. What Rob will do in the next slides is try and unpack this a bit for a wider audience, so that the language becomes a little bit more accessible. So over to Rob.
Thank you. Yeah, so obviously you start with the definition, and then if we break that down a little bit further, I mean, we've got a number of key elements actually within that. So there's 4 particular points actually from here. So what we're doing is we're looking for definitions and pedagogy that can respond to changes in the world. Obviously, the pandemic that we face ourselves in the moment, obviously we need something that can adapt responsively actually to that. We need to make sure that all of the information and the guidance that we actually put out is accessible to all of the different people that need to access that. So that's the prospective students, our staff, and obviously anyone essentially that is engaging with the university itself. We need to make sure that what we are doing is something that all of the staff can actually embed within their teaching. So we need something, if it's accessible and it's dynamic, people can then make use of that. They can embed that in their teaching and learning. And obviously we want that to be informed by theory, by research, so that we can get essentially some pedagogy, some evidence behind what we're actually doing, and we're building on all of the great stuff that's happened before, but also we're contributing to new ways of learning and teaching which are taking people forward. In terms of the definition itself, we're trying to look at the student side as well. So we're looking at what ABL actually means, particularly for our students, and we're looking at the developing subject knowledge and confidence around professional skills. So we're looking at employability, particularly, is wrapped into that. So not only in their time with us, but also what is going to happen to those students once they actually graduate beyond where we are at the moment. We're particularly experimenting, we're trying things out, we're working in teams, we're getting lots of feedback, so it's a reflective cycle, and we constantly are changing and updating that. The students are working within all of the ABL framework that we give, and the flexibility allows the tutors to try things out with the students, and they're constantly getting information actually back from it. We're also linking in other things like digital literacy, flexibility, And obviously some of the characteristics that you can see on there, we've got interaction with our tutors. We've got the future focus, the digitally rich learning environment. Obviously, like many of you, we have quite a well-established learning environment at Northampton that is virtual, digital, and we need to make sure that everyone can actually access that. So we're looking at all of the full range of our students, not just from a digital capability perspective, but also from the point of view of making sure that we meet all of the accessibility regulation that is out very much at the moment. We're trying to provide that supportive culture to make sure that all of our students can actually succeed. Making sure that the personal tutors, so these are the people that students are aligned to at the university, actually play a key role in terms of their development itself. And we're trying to include mentoring and peer support mechanisms. And what we're doing there is we're building a support team actually around the student to make sure that they can work within the active blended learning methodology. We're thinking about how a course actually follows active blended learning. So this is basically working with the tutors. So how do we know, or how do tutors know that their courses are following active blended learning particularly? So you've got three particular elements that we've sort of picked out here. So first of all, as you saw on some of the earlier slides, we're looking at teaching through student-centered activities, and particularly picking out there the knowledge, the understanding, the independent learning, and the digital fluency. We're looking for that mix between the face-to-face component, but it also very much so linked to that learning activity, which is outside the classroom itself. And then looking to the future, we're looking at how it actually develops the autonomy, the role of the students within society, that digital citizenship, and the employability skills that they can actually use to take beyond their time actually with Northampton itself. There's also a number of myths that actually come with that, and certainly just as we sort of talk about what ABL is, we also need to recognize what it isn't particularly. So as Ali said, it's not online in that normal sort of sense, or quasi-online. It's it's much more than that, and you've seen those dimensions earlier. Where people talk about just putting all of your content online, so you have a VLE and it doesn't really matter which one it is, putting all of the content that you've just got onto that VLE doesn't mean that you're just doing ABL. Contact time, some of the people have sort of thought, actually, does it reduce contact time? No, it doesn't. It very much sort of at minimum sort of stays the same, and obviously increases potentially the amount of contact time that you will have potentially with students. It's about putting students at the center there. It's not about saving teaching space. Obviously, we moved to a new purpose-built environment that actually built on the principles of ABL, but we did that because ABL is a better pedagogy from where we were previously. Blackboard Collaborate is one of our conferencing systems, and some people think, okay, if you just use a conferencing system, and we're in a particular one at the moment, GoToMeeting. Some people think just by using that is ABL and you'll be fine, and no, it's not. And again, the final one particularly is, as long as you don't lecture too much, you're okay. It is thinking differently. So we are doing a learning design remethodology really alongside of that. So and there's many more obviously myths that come out. So we do work with people to try and take them through this journey and this process. We've done some, obviously, as you'd expect, we've done some research around what the staff and the student experience of ABL actually is. And what you've got on this slide, particularly on the left-hand side there, you've got the elements that are actually working towards supporting ABL implementation. And on the right-hand side, you've got some of the barriers. And actually, if you move along the various rows there, you can see, for example, technology, which was very prevalent actually in there. Using technology in teaching was found to be a distinct enabler, but obviously a barrier is if the students don't engage with the learning itself. So essentially those things can have to be recognized so that you can actually address those up front. We're looking at class size, we're looking at interactions, we're looking at activities, and all of those things have corresponding barriers that have to be recognized, and then you can work through those particular areas as well. So in terms of where we are with regards to attractive blended learning, we had the methodology, we had the new campus. That was great. We were obviously, nearly 2 years into active blended learning, and then we came to March of this year, and everything sort of changed, beyond recognition for many of us, really. So these cartoons sort of represent some of the reactions from institutions at that particular time. So obviously that March to April period, there was very much the need to develop a COVID-19 response. There was a lot of discussions there around what emergency remote teaching is, as opposed to pre-planned online courses. And you can see there, for some people, emergency remote teaching was seen as a lesser experience. Certainly, it was a massive change for people. For Northampton, I think it's fair to say that we'd had already moved to quite a lot of different components, which helped us during the move itself. So we already had we had staff with laptops, which obviously helped people then work from home. We've got telephone systems, which means that actually everything was running through your laptop already, so you didn't need to worry. So people were used to hot desking. They obviously had to set up a particular environment in their own home itself, but actually for some people that was not a major problem. We've got my team, the learning technology team, who are helping people move to using all of the tools that are actually available. We've got a wide range of tools. We've got a great tool set at Northampton, which people were able to tap into. We've got the library learning services team, who are very supportive. And we've also got lots of other student support teams who move very quickly into remote support. We also engage a lot with JISC, and they are a sort of an international group. So, but particularly within the UK, we focus on the staff and the student digital trackers. So we had a fairly good idea about where the students and staff were at that particular time. So essentially that gave us a temperature reading of the current status itself. As the university itself actually moved from a critical response stage, which was in that sort of March, April time, to business recovery, we had loads of regular focus group meetings, so a lot of communication actually going on there, which is coordinating the response at each stage. And we actually picked up all of the communication to our staff and students was rapidly improving during that period. Naturally, it was a bit of a panic at the start, as it was probably for everyone, but actually we moved fairly quickly into normal communication mode. So, and people have actually appreciated that. Many documents were actually rapidly created at that time, so we got lots of hints and tips on teaching remotely, lots of clarification. We've got a home support hub for display screen equipment and so on, and all of those things were really helpful. So the model that we've actually got on the screen at the moment is thinking very much about the different responses that each institution might actually have. So from our side, we had elements that were responsive, obviously, particularly in those first few weeks, but then we started looking at what was going to happen in the next few months beyond that, and then for the next few years, and what potentially was going to change. So you actually follow through a number of these cycles actually inside here. So what I want to try and just get in the chat box, if possible, is for you to just place where potentially you are at the moment, to actually sort of place yourself on these particular circles. So essentially, was your institution, was your response, was it just a responsive knee-jerk type reaction at that time, or was it more developmental? Was it building sensibly on things that had actually happened before, or were you pushing boundaries in terms of actually trying to be more radical? So we'll keep an eye on the chat box as that actually sort of goes on, and see if there's any sort of responses. But if you want to think about that, then we can sort of pick that up in the discussion. Ali, do you want to?
Yeah. Well, that takes us to the definition of active distance learning. So by default, in the weeks following the 18th of March, in our case, when we went into lockdown, we had to move to not ABL anymore as we used to know it, but ABL without the campus element. The principles around it, the diagrams around it did not change. What did change is the fact that the students weren't there anymore and the staff weren't there anymore. So the notion of active doing and thinking, the notion of student engagement, artifacts, scaffolding, all of that remained in place. But the mode of teaching changed. So we had to very quickly adjust to a scenario for teaching that the university had not been set up for. But what we found out, as Rob said before, that the work done by colleagues over the past 6 years or so in the area of active blended learning put them in a very strong position to work at a distance overnight. And yes, we made a few mistakes, but by and large, the attitude and the skill set of staff was really already there, and they could make the shift a lot more smoothly than would have been the case had we not engaged in ABL work for all those years. One of the key elements that has been helping us as a tool to redesign all our modules from a traditional approach, like lecture seminar approach, to ABL has been the team approach to course design that we call Cairo at Northampton. Cairo is based on the Carpe Diem methodology that Julie Salmon and I have written a bit about over the years. And the diagram that you see there is a summary of what the Cairo looks like in practice. Cairo is a workshop. It can take anywhere between half a day and 2 days, and it has 6 stages: the blueprint or basic course documentation. The most exciting bit is the storyboard, prototyping elements of the storyboard for student use, check reality and feedback with actual users, review and adjust, and action plan. We've been using this systematically as part of quality processes, so validation, revalidation, change of approval, periodic subject review for all our modules. And if I'm not mistaken, over the past 6 years, we've run at Northampton in the region of 600 of these workshops, again, each taking anywhere between half a day and 2 days. So that means a lot of hours of facilitation, a lot of hours of commitment to course design. And it does say there a team approach to course design. What that means is exactly that. This is not a scenario in which we teach a bachelor's degree together, and Rob runs module 1, I do module 2, Delia does module 3, and we hardly talk to each other. That gives students a very inconsistent learning experience. A team approach addresses that and builds a team out of a group with a common denominator of pedagogic design. So that's a well-established, well-researched approach to how we managed the transition to active blended learning. In the context of COVID, a number of other workshops were offered. This is a summary of one of them. It's a planning workshop. Those of you who are trained teachers, primary, secondary teachers, for example, will know this. It's page 1 of any teacher training book. You write a lesson plan. Now, for many academics, writing a lesson plan is a bit of a revelation. They haven't done it, they don't use it, and this workshop about lesson planning has been by far the most popular one in the period of the pandemic. People really enjoy having an opportunity to plan, in this case a 1-hour session, but in other cases it could be a 3-day session when, for example, you're doing courses overseas through partnerships. The cartoon on the right hand side refers to possible interpretations of advice and guidance given to staff. for example, people say, well, don't just record and upload 1 hour videos, just cut it down, do it in segments and so forth. And then this particular tutor produced 95 5-minute segments. Now, again, I wish she had spent that time, or much of that time, creating the scaffold around those videos rather than more and more and more content. We won't get very far, particularly with the profile of students we attract at Northampton, by bombarding students with yet more content. So at this point, I'll hand over back to Rob to take us through a few lessons learned.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of some of the areas that we've just been talking about, so what sort of things have we got to sort of try and to avoid? So you've got there particularly a number of sort of key bullets really. So don't just replace all of the things that you were doing face to face with real time. Try to actually use some of the synchronous sessions to go beyond delivering content. So don't just use it as an opportunity just to lecture in the way that some people may have done previously, and try to scaffold particularly some of the material itself. So in terms of, you know, some of the things that particularly changed, I think, within Northampton, obviously we looked at assessment planning, we looked at evaluation of our students. Just in terms of some of the changes that we made, we changed mitigating circumstances. So basically we gave students 3 opportunities to actually sit, and this actually allowed them to give it a little bit more flexibility in their life, particularly in lockdown mode. Their individual situations were very varied, and some people had a lot more technical issues than others. So allowing them a lot more flexibility on that was really helpful. Also, it's worth mentioning around academic integrity. One of the things that we did notice was that there has been a rise potentially in academic integrity cases generally that we are now investigating. The nature of open book exams and the rapid change from sitting at a desk doing a physical exam to just an open book exam has given people more opportunity to be creative in their answers and in the way that they actually get their answers as well. So we've had to, in a similar way, we've had to adjust and sort of upscale our own approaches really towards academic integrity at the same time. Moving on to the next slide, what I wanted to do is just to pick out some of the experiences of students. And I attended a Blackboard teaching and learning conference in May, and for me actually this summarized quite nicely some of the things that I was hearing from our own particular students. So on the good side, obviously there was a reduction in the amount of traveling, and some of the meetings that they did attend actually became more efficient, and actually the institution adopted digital in a way that perhaps it hadn't before. On the bad side, the right-hand side, some people obviously found that the lectures became less effective. This was not at Northampton. This was actually a European university that was presenting at this time. The lectures had become less effective. And what was interesting for me was particularly that last bullet point there about using many different types of conferencing tools. What we found was that just because people were working from home, they tended to deviate towards their own preferred tools a lot of the time with students, and that was not helpful for the student experience. So particularly there was an angle of trying to look at making sure that the student experience wasn't adversely affected actually from there. So in terms of what we're actually going to retain from the experience for the next academic year, people obviously realise that they can change. There's lots of experiences that can be retained. So we've got a better balance of tech and face-to-face delivery, more flexible delivery generally. And we are looking at the induction process, particularly again, to see if we can make that more effective and efficient itself. We're also going to have a greater use of online personal development tools. And I think we're questioning what the value of meetings are. So sometimes they've become more efficient, but also they've lost some of those dynamic, sometimes meaty conversations that you tend to have in a face-to-face setting. So, you know, if we were doing this conference face-to-face, we'd probably be having some other discussions that in a slightly different way. So we're just reflecting on that, particularly from where we are at the moment. So we've got a number of key takeaways there. You've got sort of 6 key takeaways. So particularly drive from pedagogy, don't drive from the technology itself. Always put learning and teaching at the center, and use research to actually inform the development of that. Lots of opportunities since COVID. It's been a horrible time, I think, for people generally, but we need to look for some opportunities actually inside there. Looking about where you are as an institution and looking at where other people are, and then picking out the really good points actually from there. So driving for continuous improvement. And naturally, although this is at the end, you put the student at the center of planning and design. At the end of the day, this is who we're actually doing a lot of this work for. Okay, thank you.
To conclude, colleagues, just a final slide on where we are at and where our thinking is. You will remember from a slide that Rob presented at the beginning that we had 3 areas of overlap in our mission and vision slide, being super supportive, being future focused, and having social impact. The mission of the university is in the center there, transforming lives, inspiring change. That's what we need to achieve. And in the middle between the mission and those 3 areas, there's what we would refer to as the USP of the University of Northampton, and it's made up of 3 elements: active blended learning, clearly, that's been the focus of today; the integrated learner support model; and change maker. Change maker has to do with identifying social problems and doing something about them. We are a change maker campus accredited by Ashoka U, which is an organization in the United States. And if you look at the diagram there, which we call the bezel diagram, ABL enables the notion of being future focused and supporting our students. The learner support, again, obviously, the super supportive element, and the social impact. And Changemaker enables us to amalgamate the future focus and social impact elements. This is, in one slide, who Northampton is. The blue bits in the diagram show our USP, and that's where we would like to stop. So round about 40 minutes in, I'd like to pause here and invite any questions, which I think I can hand back to Delia to moderate.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Rob. That was really great. I really loved the journey and the sharing in there about how you've delivered this at Northampton. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. And we have some questions. Unfortunately, modeling the challenge of you getting used to a new platform, I've lost the question box, but I do have some written down here. And then Divya is also going to come in with some questions she's gathered from colleagues as well. So my first question that I'd like to ask is really picking up on that point that Rob made about the students being at the centre of this, and how, you know, how can we prepare students designing about their courses. The Cairo model, I think, is a fantastic model, and I know that that has had real impact at Northampton. So there's a lot there about how academics can be supported to move to this different way of working. How does Northampton prepare students who may have come from a more traditional didactic experience at school, and that will certainly be the case here in India, where that is more the norm. So I just wondered if you could share with us any experiences you've had about how students can be set up to really benefit from this new approach.
Okay, I missed a bit of your question because you went mute for a few seconds, but I think I got the gist of it. I'll probably kick off, and then Rob may want to add a bit to it. There are two parts, I think, to this. Is what's good for the student, but on the other hand, what the student expects from a university experience. And a good way to tackle your question would be, well, what do we say to students during open days? What do we say to students through our literature? What do we say to prospective students and their parents when they want to learn a little bit more about how learning and teaching works at Northampton? And then there's everything we know from research and publications from the National Union of Students about what the student body nationally thinks and expects of the university experience. And if you look at those reports, you will find that there's constant moaning about lecturing. There's constant moaning about, I go into university and all they do is put us in a 300-seater lecture theatre. They talk at us for an hour or two or three, and then occasionally they give us a small group seminar and so forth. So there is kind of an expectation that you will have to suffer in those environments. And we tell students that although any good blend may have a teacher-centered element, any good blend will have multiple things from many sources. The prominent approach at Northampton is much more student-centered in small groups, which is why maybe colleagues will be interested to hear that the new campus has no lecture theatres or staff offices. And that may be a bit of a shock to some people. Certainly it is a shock to colleagues across the UK. No lecture theatres, oh, how am I going to do with the big groups and so on? Well, this is not predicated on cost. This is predicated on enhancing the student experience. This is predicated on good quality teaching. This is predicated on at least knowing your students' names. This is predicated on relationship building. Now, putting 300 people together in a lecture theatre is not conducive to any of that. And we prepare them by showing in an open day what our classrooms look like, what the technology in the classroom does, what sort of experience they should expect at Northampton, and how that differs from the experience that they might expect elsewhere. And we explain to them why we think that works, why we think it's good, what the research shows about high levels of interaction rather than content input, and then go away and come back with the assignment. That's the sort of preparation that we give them through multiple means. I don't know if I've answered your question or if Rob wants to add a bit more.
I was just going to add a little bit more, really. Just say that as part of the curriculum redevelopment process, part of the Cairo process that we mentioned earlier, then we try to involve students actually inside that process. So students at the heart, really, of curriculum redesign. And I think, as Ali said, the message that we actually put out to students is about good teaching, and we try to give them some idea of the experiences they're going to actually get down on the ground. So I think altogether, the reflection we get from our students is that some of them don't necessarily need to know the detail of exactly the pedagogy behind everything. They just want good teaching, particularly.
Yeah, no, that's great. And in terms of induction, in terms of, say, for example, the induction time when the students do come, are there any particular tools that you use to ensure that the students are able to move into this mode smoothly? Is there any special changes that you made to induction when you moved to active blended learning?
I think as far as induction is concerned, I mean, we've been discussing that very recently, obviously, because we're looking at how that changes in the situation for our students coming back in September. So we're trying to model active blended learning in the induction process. So again, rather than a passive lecture, we used to, years ago, we used to trundle all of our students into a lecture theatre and then talk at them for 3 hours, for example, about all the things they needed to know. And actually, that was when you were at Northampton, Delia. It was very much like that. But more recently, what we're doing is we're getting the values of active blended learning. So we're looking at what information we need to convey. We're distilling that down, and then we're conveying that in a way which engages the students in a way that they weren't before. So we're getting them doing things. So, for example, and this is just one example, we have taken some of the escape room mentality. So this is where people actually, if some of you have been through this environment, you basically are put through a series of quizzes to actually escape a particular environment. And what we've done is we've adapted some of those questions so that each time people are actually asking or answering particular questions, they're learning about our environment. So it's involving them in a much more active way than the very passive experience that we used to do, and which lots of universities still do very much at the moment. So they're trying to get a feel for what active blended learning is by doing active blended learning, which is the best way to learn it.
And I would add to that, Delia, that there's a piece of work that's taken place for staff as well, because when we recruit anyone, lecturer or above, they've got to be well aware of what they're getting themselves into by joining Northampton. So there is a clear statement about active blended learning on the HR website with the vacancies, and where we say, look, this is how we do learning and teaching here. Here are a few more links if you're interested. This is what we expect of you. Which is a nice way of saying, if all you can do is stand up and spout, then you may want to look for a job elsewhere.
I think that they're both great answers to that question, and I think that modelling and transparency and really being upfront is really important. And I know for many colleagues in India, they're going through a transition period because, of course, COVID has driven this, but we know that opportunities and good developments will come out of it. So I think they're really helpful answers to colleagues. I have one more question, and then I'm going to hand over to Divya to ask the questions she's been able to see from the various boxes and things that she's got there. My final question that I've got here from this side is, how can institutional leadership support success for an institution that might be where Northampton was a few years ago? So how can the senior colleagues support this development and support this type of change for an institution?
Right, I'll get started on that, and I would begin by saying that in many instances I hear the phrase lack of senior management buy-in, and never has that been more meaningless than at Northampton. Senior management at Northampton really supported this from the beginning. Bear in mind that the Waterside campus, the new campus, is not the reason why we're doing ABL, is the response to a view of learning and teaching that we've had. And it is a shared view that senior management had across the board, and that we wanted to generate the best possible space to implement it in. So I think it is fair to say that a lot of the change, a lot of the transformation that we went through in the past 6 years had a significant element of top-downness. There was a lot of leadership required at various levels to make it happen. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't an easy journey. The approach that we took to generate more consensus and to enable people to see the value and hopefully embrace this is very much based on evidence, support, and agency. Evidence in a format that staff can identify themselves with. Where is the evidence globally? Where is the evidence locally? How do we know that an approach like this really generates good outcomes? Support through a series of staff development initiatives that enable people to make the transition, to move away from the traditional I know it all, I deliver it to you. You will have noticed that I have not used the word deliver in my presentation, because simply it generates a bit it gives you an indication of the sort of approach. And the final point is agency, which means power to decide what's best for my students, and that was never removed from the teachers. We do not use policing for this. We use peer observation not for performance management, we use peer observation for development. So those are things that senior management and others have used over time. The one other thing I would say is people are often quite quick to judge new approaches, to ask difficult questions about new approaches, but they often forget to ask the same difficult questions about their current approaches. They often forget to put the old way of doing things through the same filters, and they assume that the old way is the right way, or the good way, or the way that works. Frankly, we need to think again, and we need to put every aspect of our teaching approach through the difficult questions that we want to ask. Regardless of the scenario, we got to get to the best way of teaching in our context. Content is not king, context is. Rob, do you want to add anything to that?
Just to say that the main thing I think that was really important all the way through, and it underpins a lot of project planning and rollouts, is communication. So it's making sure that people know what is going on at all of the levels. So relying on people cascading information doesn't generally work. You have to communicate directly with people. And if you want to do consultation, actually consult. Don't just tell people what you want them to do and call that consultation. That's different, really. So at some point you have to do that with deadlines, because consultation can be completely open-ended to the point that actually no decisions are actually made. So you have to set an endpoint and say, we're going to take your views up to that date, and then a decision will be made. You can freely make a decision or contribute to it up to that point, but after that point, a decision will be made, and that is it, really, at that point. Obviously, you can reflect on it, and you can change it and modify it later on, but you've got to be careful that with very big plans like we did for Waterside and with ABL, it just didn't become an ongoing conversation that never finished. So at some point, you've just got to call it a day and then move on actually from that.
In other words, do consultation, but never get paralyzed by it.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's right. Well, thank you. I think that will be really helpful to colleagues across India who are in senior roles, who are looking at how they make these shifts and how they can support their own sort of colleagues in moving ahead in this area. I think they'll be really helpful observations. Divya, would you like to cover the questions that you've got that I haven't been able to see?
Absolutely, Delia. Thank you, Rob and Ali. I'm just cognizant of time. We have 2 minutes left, so this would be a quick one. We have a question from one of our attendees, which is how to encourage peer learning in the student cohort when you're teaching in an online format.
So you could do that from both a technical and pedagogical view. So from a technical point of view, then obviously we have got tools which actually allow people to engage in that. So I think what you're talking about, Ashmir, is actually the idea of people learning from each other in online. So it's allowing open discussion boards, particularly in some areas, so that people can see what is actually going on, encouraging people to contribute and to look back at the requests. So from a tutor perspective, not necessarily always providing the answers up front, but actually using the environment itself of the people that you've got learning and sharing at the same time to encourage the peer learning itself. And I think that can actually work really well in the online format, whether it's both asynchronous and synchronous, particularly as well. Ali, do you want to add a little bit more to that at all?
I think for me, encouraging peer learning and anything to do with working with your peers, whether it's peer learning or peer assessment, boils down to the two key elements of this, which is design and teaching practice. Design is everything I said about the Cairo process and the Carpe Diem. Build those things in, design them in, so that you cannot escape this situation without learning. design these things in from the first day onwards. Design them in, align them to assessment. That's very much the design part. And the implementation part relates to how each individual tutor puts that into practice. It's very good to have a fantastic design, but it won't do any good if you run your course in a very traditional manner that does not really follow what you did in the planning. So for me, the two key elements are those: get the design right, but then practice it, micro teach it, get feedback, do peer observation to get it right in the classroom with the students.
Thank you. Thanks, Ali. Thanks, Rob. Divya, do you have any more questions? I know we're running out of time, but it's such an important topic. Else that's there that we haven't covered?
No, Delia, that was actually the last question, so we're all good.
Okay. Thank you very much. I would just like to say thank you so much, Ali and Rob. It's been really fascinating to listen and to have that absolutely practical insight into how you deliver change on the scale that you have achieved at Northampton. I think it's inspiring. I think colleagues across India will have benefited from it, and will benefit from the future in maybe coming in and visiting and talking to you further about it, because it's a fantastic story and really great. And thank you for sharing, and thank you so much to our audience for listening. And we have been recording it. We will be distributing the recording to colleagues who haven't been able to join us today, who had registered. And thank you very much. All have a lovely Friday evening. Have a lovely weekend. And thank you very much to colleagues in the UK. Look forward to seeing you next week on our next webinar about internationalization as a driver for growth, when we are joined by Professor Vargse and Professor Momleo, and I know that will be fascinating as well. Both practitioners again, real practical stuff. Thank you so much. Bye bye now. Bye Ali. Bye Rob.
Thank you everyone. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye.